going on, everybody? Thanks for stopping by. This video today is going to cover installation of Caltracs on my 81 Camaro. This should cover every second gen Camaro as well. So thanks for checking it out, and let's jump into it.
Alright guys, so as you can see, we got the back tires off, and I've got the rear end jacked up by the axle, and my jack stands are sitting on the subframe. So at this point, what I'm doing, as you can see, I've already done one over here. I've got the shock mount loosened, and at this point I'm going to drop the rear end until all the tension is off of it, and then I'm going to put just a little bit of tension back on it just to keep it supported. So the reason you do that is the next step after you get these bolts loose, or the nuts loose for the shocks, is you got to undo the U-bolts that hold the axle to the leaf spring. And once I do that, we'll jump into the next step and keep it moving. Alright, so we've got the nuts that hold the U-bolts on loose. Like I said, make sure your leaf springs are all the way decompressed. They have more travel than the shocks do, so your shocks will not be anywhere near the mounting plates once the leaf spring is at its loosest position. And like I said, you're going to jack that back up just a little bit to put some pressure on it, just enough where you can kind of see it starting to move. And then the next thing you're going to do before you actually wind up jacking the axle up off the leaf spring, once all the nuts holding the U-bolts are out, is put another jack underneath the nose of the rear end. And the reason you do that is once you start to lift the axle, there's a possibility that the pinion will rotate down, and just may lead to some issues once you start moving some things around. So I used a trolley jack underneath the snout, if you will, of the rear end, and that's going to look something like this. So like I said, as you can see, you just want to support the front end of the axle as you jack it up. Once you get the nuts off of the U-bolts and start to lift the axle out, that will just keep the pinion from rotating downwards. And then ideally you'll have some other jack stands or something to support the rear end on the sides to keep it from tipping left to right as you jack it up as well. So that's where we're at. We'll catch you in a minute. Alright, so these four positions are where those nuts that hold your U-bolts in place are at. I've removed them, of course, now. So at this point, what you're going to do is get a pry bar, if you need to, somewhere in here, and pry these spring plates, or shock mounting plates off, I should say. Now, if you'll notice, we have one U-bolt on the outside, and the inside is just a retainer. So just keep that in mind. Those retainers are two separate pieces, so just make sure you keep up with both of those if they wind up coming all the way out. That's where we're at. Alright, so as you can see, we have separation from the leaf spring. So next step is we got to drop the leaf spring purchase, which are going to be 3 bolts on each side, and I'll show you those here in a second. Alright, so underneath the car at the front leaf spring perch, we've got 1 bolt here, the 2nd bolt here, and the 3rd bolt right here. Those are the 3 that need to come out for us to drop the front leaf spring out, or front of the leaf spring out, and get that bushing out and put the new piece in and actually start to get some of the stuff from Caltracs Racing installed. So here we go. Alright, so we had a much longer day yesterday than anticipated. Partially my fault. I did not read the instructions all the way, so I fought the leaf spring with it on the car, which is not something you're supposed to do. You're actually supposed to drop the leaf spring out entirely, and that will help you get out that front bushing, and that was the big holdup yesterday. So we're back at it today. This is day 2 of the project, and want to show you where my mistake was. So you may not be able to see it all that well, but there's a bolt that holds your leaf spring to the rear shackle. For some reason I missed the instructions that was not supposed to come off. It actually is. So remove that bolt after you get your front leaf spring pocket out, and your life will be a whole lot easier when it comes to getting the bushing out, which I'll show you how to do here in just a minute. Alright, so once you get your leaf spring out, first thing you're going to want to grab is a drill and a drill bit set. I start with a 5/16, and basically what you do is you put holes all through the rubber, go back with your 1/2 inch, and finish it out. And what that does is that drills all the rubber out and leaves it where the center metal sleeve can come out, collapse the rubber down, and then that's leaving you with the outer sleeve. The outer sleeve, you can either put a sawzall through it and put a mark or 2 marks in it to cut through the shell, and then you get either chisels or flat blades and drive behind the shell between it and the leaf spring to collapse it and pull it out. Or you can do what I do, which is put a single cut in the sleeve itself and then do the same thing, get chisels or flat blades and drive all the way around it to get it to fold in on itself and break free from the leaf spring. So that's where we're at. Get back to you in a minute. Alright, so to give you a better idea, this is what it looks like when it's almost done. So like I said, you just want to split the outer shell across the leaf spring. Try not to get into the leaf spring when you cut it with a sawzall or a hacksaw. And then just start driving a screwdriver just off to the side of the cut. And eventually you'll get around to where this is basically just starting to collapse in on itself as you drive screwdrivers behind it. So that's how I did it. It's worked for me on the other side, and it's working so far on this side. So we'll catch you on the next step. After you've got the outer shell out, next you just need to clean up the inside of the spring eye. And at that point, you can press the new aluminum bushing in after you grease it. That's my recommendation. I beat the other side in with a hammer. It worked out, but definitely not the best way to do it. So if you have access to a press, be sure to get everything set up to press the new aluminum bushing in. Let's go. Alright, so I hope you made it this far, and you've got a new bushing sitting in the front of your leaf spring now. So at this point, what you're going to do is come down, grab your Caltrac pivot plate is what they call it, and if you notice, you've got a solid pin here, there's an empty gap right between here, and then of course you have your rod end down at the bottom. So what you're going to wind up doing is sliding the pivot plate over the leaf spring. Alright, so that is how the two pieces should look when they're put together. You've got your solid roll pin up here above the leaf spring. That's where your bolt is going to go to remount this back to the front spring pocket. And of course there's your rod end for the actual Caltrac bar itself. So that's how it should look, and we'll get ready to bolt this back together and get the leaf spring perch back under the car with this new setup attached. Quick note as you're assembling the pivot block and everything back to your leaf spring pocket, there is going to be some overhang or some extra, if you will, rod hanging out of the pivot area. Those are taken up by the included 1/8 spacers, so that's where they go. And then at this point, you'll slide your leaf spring pocket back over the top, put your leaf spring bolt back through it, torque it to 75 foot-pounds, or you can wait to do that when it's on the car if there's room. And your front assembly is pretty much ready to go. After you've got your leaf spring pocket remounted to the leaf spring and everything's torqued down, what you're going to wind up doing is reinstalling your leaf spring back to the car and getting ready to lower your axle back onto the leaf spring itself. My recommendation once you do that is to install the nuts for the U-bolts and retainers, leave one side loose, and then install the other, because you may have to walk the axle around like I did just a little bit to get it back on the locator pins. So at this point, everything's in place, everything's been snug but not torqued, and we'll go and torque these U-bolts and retainers down to 65 foot-pounds, and we'll move on to the next step. Next step after getting your axle torqued back into place is to get your rods ready to go underneath and actually connect between the pivot and the leaf spring mount. So what you're going to do is you've got a hex end and a rounded end. The hex end is going up into the leaf spring pocket area at the front, and the rounded end is going towards the rear on the leaf spring mount. So what they call for you to do is grease your rod ends on the threads, thread them in all the way on both ends, install one end under the car, and then as you hold the other rod end in place, turn the rod to get everything to line up so you can get your mounting bolts in. So at this point, what you want to do is actually, you can leave the front one in place. I don't know how well they're going to be able to see that, but that's actually already been locked down. From the factory, that lockment on the back side is tight. So what you can do is grease that, thread the front portion in, and then thread the rear tie rod end or joint in, and you'll be good to go. Alright, so this is what you're gonna look like after you get those rods ready to go on and actually put them in place. So at this point, what you do is you jack the rear end up. Leaf springs are all attached and everything now, so everything's gonna move together. And you're gonna jack the back end up until you're able to get the shocks remounted. And at that point, you can go ahead and crawl back under here and get your rods adjusted out to where they'll actually mount up on the leaf spring plate. So that's where we're at. We'll catch you in a minute. Alright, so this is the process of getting these links to where they will actually install on your brackets. So what they say to do is obviously get it up, and what you're going to do is put forward or back pressure on this eyelet. As you can see, as I turn it one direction, it's starting to lengthen. And the reason you thread these eyelets in all the way and make sure the nuts are at their most loose position, these nuts right here, is so that way you make sure you've got equal threads in on both ends of the rods or very close to it. So all you're going to do is make sure that this rod end doesn't turn, and you'll adjust it out until it's going to be able to go through the bolt hole in the leaf spring bracket. Now the thing to keep in mind, what you just saw there, is your pivot's free floating right now. So you can kind of play with that a little bit to get it to come forward and back as needed, and you'll wind up doing the baseline adjustment here in just a few minutes. So as you see, I pulled that pivot back, and we actually got very close to being lined up. So at this point, just do the same on the other side, and be ready to jump to the next step. Alright, so once your bars are installed, the instructions call for you to adjust this until there is an air gap between the pivot block pin right here at the top and the leaf spring. So just turn the bar one way or the other to get your adjustment where you need it. And like I said, they call for an air gap, so that's just a small space between that pin and the leaf spring. Make sure it's equal on both sides. This is not the baseline adjustment for these things. This is just what the instructions call for you to do before you actually get this thing on the ground at driving weight to make your true initial setup. So that's where we're at. Once I get this thing on the ground, just kind of show you exactly what that initial setup is going to look like. Calls for a quarter turn on the initial set. So that's what we'll do, and I'll show you all what that looks like here in just a minute. So here we are, day 3 or 4 of this project. Took a little bit longer than I anticipated, but that's okay. It's pretty much done. Just getting ready to make our baseline adjustment. So what you want to make sure you have is the car close to race weight or driving weight, as close as you can get it, and you'll be ready to start making your initial adjustment. So let's jump into what that looks like. If you look at your Caltrac bar, of course the end that's closest to your pivot at the front has got flats on it. It's like a hex setup. So what you want to do in this case, and I think it's going to be across all the Caltracs, I think this is the initial adjustment for all of them. What you're going to wind up doing is taking the preload to 1/4 turn or 2 flats. So to get there, what you wind up doing is turn the bars counterclockwise. Doesn't matter which side of the car you're working on, but it's counterclockwise when you're looking at it from the rear of the vehicle, and that will increase preload, or in this case it will move the pin that's up here closer to the leaf spring. So what you're going to do is you're going to turn the bars counterclockwise until you feel resistance. It's going to go from pretty free spinning to having some tension on it. It's not going to get impossible to turn, but you'll feel it. It's a sensation that I can't really describe, but you'll know what happens when it does. So once you get to that point, that's where that pin that's on top has made contact with the leaf spring, and that's going to be kind of a 0, if you will. So that's your 0 preload. You're going to take it 2 flats or a 1/4 turn past that. So what that means is, if this is my reference flat that I'm deciding to use, you're going to turn the bar counterclockwise to increase preload until this flat takes this one's place, and then you'll do it one more time. And at that point, you've got 2 flats or a 1/4 turn of preload, and that is your baseline setup for Caltracs to get going. All right, and at that point, you're ready to go. So initial setup is done, Caltracs are installed, and we're ready for the next part. So for this car in particular, I've got subframe connectors on the way. I had originally intended to install some while everything was up in the air. But long story short, when I bought the car, they came with subframe connectors that weren't installed. They turn out to be for a 70 to 75. which they're a little bit shorter than they need to be for the 76s and up. So no big deal. A couple $100 on some new subframe connectors and we'll be back in business, so not too worried about that. But subframe connectors, redoing the fuel lines in the car, taking them from rubber to aluminum, and some adjustable shocks are in the future for this car. Slicks and skinnies on the front, of course, too. This is going to be going to the drag strip. So that's what's on the way for this car. I also picked up another project. It's a 73 Datsun 240Z. It's not in bad shape. Everything is there for the car to put it back, you know, original with the 6-cylinder and the 5-speed. But I don't think that's the route I'm gonna go. But that'll be a whole another series of videos, and we'll kind of do a little reveal probably here in about a week. Just kind of give you an idea of what I'm working with. It's not in terrible shape. There's some rust in the hatch area, and the floor pans are gone, but everything else on the car appears to be pretty solid. So everything came together real quick to kind of get that. It came out of the blue a little bit, if you will. So anyways, that's kind of giving you a heads up on what's coming. If you've made it this far, I really appreciate it. So if you want to see the progress on this car, the new project, and whatever else comes to the channel, please feel free to subscribe. If you enjoyed the video, it helped you out get some Caltracs installed on your ride, please leave a like, a comment, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you.